Доброго вечора, ми з України.
Hello everyone, and welcome back to Ushanka Show, stories about life in the Soviet Union. Today we're going to continue our conversation about Grigory Vasilyevich Romanov, the Soviet leader of the Leningrad region that could possibly save the Soviet Union. This is part 2, and if you missed my first video, I'll post the link below in the comment section. But before we begin, I would like to read one of the comments under my first video. It's by Cyberspine. Even accepting the tanky premise, it does raise an important question: why was the Soviet system so brittle that one bad pick for leader led to the collapse, if not only the USSR, but the overthrow of communist leadership in all of Europe? If communists were capable of learning from their mistakes, they would figure out the system had serious flaws that needed fixing. And that's a great point. So I picture the Soviet system as a pyramid that sits upside down on its tip, just a tip. And if that tip, the leader of the Soviet Union, turned out to be a bad guy, the whole pyramid would collapse. That pretty much it sounds like we just need to put the right tip in the end of that pyramid, and pyramid will stay for another 100 years. Meanwhile, the Western democracies look more like a pyramid set the proper way with the tip up, and doesn't matter really what person on the top of that pyramid, the whole system is way more stable. So while the Soviet Union couldn't survive more than 5 years of the Mikhail Gorbachev rule, the United States survived, for example, 4 years of Jimmy Carter rule, which many people consider the worst president ever. The American economy struggled but survived the high inflation and the energy crisis, while Jimmy Carter, a peanut farmer and a Democrat, was in the White House. Of course, a lot of people forget or wanted to forget that he also graduated from Naval Academy in 1946 with a Bachelor of Science degree. Personally, sometimes I wonder if maybe Jimmy Carter was just way ahead of his time, because back in 1979 he installed solar panels on the White House roof, and those 32 panels stayed up there till 1986 when Ronald Reagan ordered to have them removed. America also survived Ronald Reagan, the Hollywood actor who was so good in playing the role of American president that many Republicans believed that he was the best president ever. Somehow they forget that Ronald Reagan, when he was a governor of California back in 1967, signed a bill that allowed abortions in California in order to protect women's health. Back in 1967, Republican governor signed that bill. And it's getting worse. In the same year, 1967, Ronald Reagan, a Republican governor, signed a bill prohibiting public carry of loaded firearms without a permit. And it's the Republican. When he was the President of the United States back in 1986, he signed the law, Firearm Owners Protection Bill, which actually somehow banned any fully automatic firearms not registered prior May 1980. And as a cherry on top, during the Reagan administration, the budget deficit of the United States grew from $70 billion to $152 billion. It literally doubled in 8 years, and still he considers the best Republican president ever. Sorry about this little detour, so let's go back to the topic of Grigory Romanov. In the first video about Grigory Romanov, we learned that he was quite a pathological anti-Semite, and he never bothered even to hide it. Of course, someone can say, well, you can still be a great leader even if you're anti-Semite, which is thinking about who else was the great anti-Semite, as we say in Russian, Adolf Hitler. And a lot of Jewish scientists from Germany ran away before the beginning of World War II, and they end up in America doing what? Creating the nuclear bomb. But everyone knew, not only in Leningrad, but in Moscow as well, that Grigory Romanov was quite a hardliner, and his nickname, the Great Duke of Leningrad, I guess reflected somewhat. But fun fact, despite of being such a hardliner, Romanov had a very soft spot for the luxury and for the limousines. Dear comrades, let me introduce to 1981 ZIL 115 limousine with 7.7-liter engine, 315 horsepower. Personal limo of Comrade Grigory Romanov. About 10 years ago, this limousine surfaced in Leningrad. Someone put a lot of money into restoration, and there was a personal limo, as I mentioned, of Grigory Romanov, and they were asking 12 million rubles, which I believe were about $300,000 at that time. These ZIL government limousines were quite special. They were only maintained and stored in the KGB garages, so people who worked on them actually had to have a special clearance. So not everyone out of Soviet leaders could have a limo like that. Honestly, I'm surprised that Grigory Romanov was allowed to have a limo like that. I thought it was only for like a very, very special comrades, like the level of Central Committee guys, Central Committee members. So the guy who was just kind of the top leader of Leningrad region, he probably could have a black Volga, but not black ZIL limousine. Fun fact, such limos were called chlenavoz among regular Soviet folk, and it's a nice humor there, since the word chlen, member, also means penis, right? So it's a penis carrier. At the same time, if you're a member of the Central Comedy Club, it's member carrier, chlenavoz. And that's one of the things that Grigory Romanov is remembered back in Leningrad. They remember his limo. It was the only limousine in whole city, and it was always, roads would be blocked for him to go to work and back home. So before he would leave his building, there'll be a militia, so police, a road police car blocking the traffic so the limo can come out. And then there'll be police car, militia in the front, then limousine of Romanov, and then black KGB Volga behind. So that's his standard cortege going to work and back or on the business. And for some reason, Grigory Romanov was really concerned with his security, which is kind of interesting. Soviet Union, I believe, was quite safe for the communists, especially in the 70s. He always had at least 2 KGB guys watching his building. And any place he would go, there'll be KGB people searching the building first, like if he goes to the theater or anywhere else. So they will search for explosives and anything else before he arrives. So I found that extremely strange. So what did prevent Grigory Romanov from becoming a leader of the Soviet Union back in 1985? While I was researching this guy, I discovered that a lot of people were mentioning 1974 incident during the wedding of his youngest daughter. So 11 years prior. And this is really strange because in 1974, Leonid Brezhnev was still doing good. I don't think he was looking for somebody to replace him, but a lot of people mentioned that this incident of 1974, that's what actually killed Grigory Romanov's chances to become a new Soviet leader. Once again, I need to remind you that Romanov's last name, right, is the same last name as the Tsar dynasty had for 300 years, and that's another reason why he was called the Great Duke of Leningrad and Romanovskaya Epocha. So the story goes that during his wedding, which they did in Tavrida Palace, at that time that was occupied or taken over by the Communist Party of Leningrad region, he had a wedding there, and he requested from the Hermitage Museum, from their storage, they requested a china set from the Catherine the Great, because Catherine the Great is also of Romanov dynasty. So they used that china set, which kind of precious, right, during their wedding. And when people got drunk, there is a Russian tradition to break a glass for luck. So you have a shot of vodka, for example, and it says "Na здоровье" или "Na удачи," and you just throw that glass on the floor and break it. So people got so drunk they started breaking this china set, and he returned half of it only because the rest was destroyed. So that's how the story goes. And there are several completely opposite explanations of this wedding story. One claims that it's totally faked, it was never happened. The wedding was actually a small wedding, just 10 people attended at Romanov's dacha, which I found extremely suspicious because the guy who liked to ride limos would never ever have a small private wedding for his daughter. The wedding, that's when you invite all the important people, when you build connections. So no way Grigory Romanov will have a small 10-person wedding at his dacha when he was the top dog of Leningrad. By the way, I forgot to mention that this story of Romanov's wedding actually was leaked or discovered somehow by the Western media, those Western fake media bastards, and it was published first in Der Spiegel, a German magazine, West Germany at that time, and then it went all over the world, and everyone knew about it in Leningrad, so I think it's actually happened. But there's also the version that the Soviet KGB leaked this information in order to damage Grigory Romanov's chances to become a next leader of the Soviet Union. I don't think this KGB leak story is credible. First of all, I don't think it will be worth it for anyone in the Soviet government to leak such information or have such an expression, "не выносить ссоры из избы." So like you don't carry the trash out of the house to show your neighbors. And that's a lot of like a damage for Communist Party of the Soviet Union to tell the world, hey, one of our important people had this crazy wedding when they destroyed a lot of historical items. So I don't think that will be the true story. And of course, it's 1974. Grigory Romanov became the communist leader of Leningrad just 4 years prior. So no one really knew him, I don't think, in Moscow. So there was no reason to do anything like that to him. Some people think there was a KGB officers at that wedding, and they started this throwing glasses on the floor and breaking them to kind of make other people do it. So there was like a almost provocation. But if that'll be happening maybe in 1979 or 78 when the Brezhnev was kind of getting weaker, I kind of see that Andropov was trying to damage his competition, but not back in 1974. But at any rate, this wedding incident of 1974 was the black mark on the career of Grigory Romanov. That's what people remember him for his daughter's wedding and for his love of limos. And I think it's one of the reasons why he failed to compete successfully with Mikhail Gorbachev back in 1985. And I don't subscribe to the view that Yuri Andropov was viewing Grigory Romanov as his competition, because when Andropov became the general secretary back in 1982, he actually invited Romanov to come to Moscow from Leningrad. You never ever do that for your competition, but he called Romanov to come to Moscow and put him in charge of the military industrial complex, because he said the expenses are totally like out of control and you need to do something to reduce our military expenses because our economy can't handle it. He said, we don't have enough money. Ustinov, who was at that time a Department of Defense minister, he said, we are spending way too much money on our military and Oboronku. So Andropov placed Grigory Romanov in charge of VPK, military industrial complex, and he brought Mikhail Gorbachev to be in charge of the agriculture. So both guys worked under Andropov. Another important detail I need to mention about Romanov and being a socialist hardliner, he actually did a great thing in the Leningrad region because he was actually in charge of Obkom, so that Oblastnoy Komitet, not just the Gorkom, which is a city committee of the Communist Party. He was in charge of the whole Leningrad region. So he closed all the collective farms in the Leningrad region. Not really closed, but he made them into sovkhoz. So he turned collective farms into the Soviet farms. And if you have no idea what I'm talking about, I have a whole video dedicated to this topic of kolkhozy versus sovkhozy, and I'll post the link in the comment sections below this video. So the switch from the collective farms to the Soviet farms, at the Soviet farms, you just employee, you're actually getting paid for your work. It improved greatly the food supply to Leningrad city. So that was a good thing he did, but it's definitely anti-Stalin because Stalin was a big fan of collective farms, big fan of kolkhozy. We also need to mention that Grigory Romanov, like many other Soviet leaders, was a hard drinker. And apparently back in 1978, unfortunately I couldn't find any information, but he got publicly drunk in Finland. So during the visit in Finland, which is Leningrad, it's right on the border with Finland, right? So during the visit, he got drunk really bad, just like Boris Yeltsin later did. And that's actually also didn't impress people in Moscow. And this pretty lady name is Lyudmila Senchina, and she was a famous Soviet singer back in the 70s and 80s. And there were rumors about an affair between Lyudmila Senchina and Grigory Romanov. Bad, bad boy. People who worked with Grigory Romanov mentioned that he was quite selfish and quite rude. And he hardly had any friends, which is really important in the Soviet governmental system. You need to have friends in high places in order to be helped, to be promoted. And that's what he said, actually. Grigory Romanov mentioned about Gorbachev, that I couldn't resist Gorbachev because there was a whole group of his friends, like Ryzhkov, Ligachev, and others, and Romanov had no one. And definitely Mikhail Gorbachev wasn't a big fan or a friend of Grigory Romanov, because right after becoming a general secretary of the Soviet Union back in 1985, he sent Grigory Romanov into the retirement. He was still pretty young in 85 because he was born, let's see what we got, 1923. So he was still young by the Soviet government standards, only 62-year-old, but he was forced into retirement, and he was really quiet. During his retirement, he didn't write any memoirs, no books. And some people say that his silence was his залог его жизни. So that's why he was alive and died in 2008, because he kept his mouth shut. And before we wrap up, I want to show you this photo I found by accident. So this is 1972, and you may recognize this beautiful black lady, Angela Davis, during her visit in Leningrad, and right next to her is Grigory Romanov. So my conclusion, Grigory Romanov never had a chance to become a next leader of the Soviet Union back in 1985. And I wonder what you guys think, so please post your comment. He had no friends in high places, except that rumor that Leonid Brezhnev for some reason really liked him, although he wasn't part of the Brezhnev mafia, so-called, because Brezhnev, after his time in Dnipropetrovsk, he was moving people around that were with him, including Chernenko, Konstantin Chernenko. So, and also Grigory Romanov had really bad personality, and he had some bad history. So he had no chance, I think, to become a general secretary of Soviet Union. And the main thing, the Soviet car was already falling apart. So it doesn't matter who would be a driver, Gorbachev or Romanov, that car would still end up in a ditch. Romanov probably could make it bloodier. The whole collapse of the Soviet Union and collapse of the Soviet system, all that Eastern Bloc, probably will be way uglier. But as an end result, the Soviet Union will still disappear. Okay, my friends, that's all I have for today. I want to thank again all my supporters on patreon.com and the people that became a member of my YouTube channel. Thank you so much, guys. It's greatly appreciated. And we'll talk to you soon. До свидания. Goodbye.
Потому что если дороги будут, то по ним неприятель проедет. И